Hi everyone. Famous atheist Richard Dawkins recently some time ago did a talk with Cardinal George Pell in a program called Q&A, and so it was about religion and science and stuff. And at some point, Dawkins was talking about evolution. The topic of evolution was brought up, and Dawkins made some statements about evolution that would in fact entail that evolution, as he understands it, is not true, which is quite amusing. And I called this Dawkins' absurd thesis, and I want to share with you. It did two absurd theses that can be shown in a sense mathematically absurd in less than 20 seconds. So let's hear the first one.
Australopithecine, but there never was a last Homo erectus who gave birth to the first Homo sapiens. Every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents.
Listen, every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents. Now, that may seem like, okay, very acceptable, but that's in fact impossible. And it's not impossible, but given the fact that today there are human beings, and some time ago there were no human beings, then it's impossible. So, and first I'm going to give you an idea of why it's impossible, then I'm going to show you a formal proof of why it's impossible. The reason why it's impossible is very simple. If every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents, it follows that no species can change in a sense, because so suppose that 1 million years ago there was a creature, and that creature gave birth to another creature, which gave birth to another creature, etc., until today. Now, if every one of those creatures was the same species as its parent, then our creature today would be the same species as the first creature 1 million years ago. So if you apply that to human beings, given the evolutionary thesis that we descend from apes, so if I go back to my parent and the parent of my parent, etc., there is a time in which one of my ancestors is in fact an ape. So the problem with that is if that ape's son is also an ape and so on, I would be an ape too, and I'm not. So from that it follows that there must sometimes creatures give birth to creatures that are not the same species of the parents. Now, how do you formalize that? Well, use something called the principle of induction, that basically says that if a certain predicate or property is hereditary and it holds for a fixed number that we can take, for example, 0, then it holds for all natural numbers. So let me try to think about like an example of this, very trivial, for example. So you can say that if a number is not negative, right, then the number after that is not negative either, right? So if n is not negative, then n plus 1 is not negative. And you know that 0 is not negative. From that it follows that all numbers bigger than 0 are not negative. So if you want to hear discussions about induction, I mean, this is a mathematically universally accepted uh, uh, principle or theorem. You can prove it if you define the rational numbers the natural numbers, sorry, in a precise way. So how do you use this principle to show that Dawkins is wrong? Well, it's very simple. So Dawkins says that the property of being of the same species is hereditary. So from that it follows that the property of being of a species that's not a human being is hereditary, because if I am of a species that's not a human being and I have a children, then that children is also of a species that's not a human being because it's the same species as I am, etc., etc. So then this is what Dawkins says: every animal gives birth to an animal of the same species. So therefore this property here is hereditary, which means that if it's true for some n, it's true for n plus 1. Okay, and here n of course denotes the number of generations after the first one, which you can like arbitrarily decide which one you consider the first. So for any animal X that existed 100 million years ago, X was not a human being. Okay, this is a scientific fact. Okay, 100 million years ago there were no human beings. So every animal that existed 100 million years ago belonged to a species that was not a human being. Now, from this it follows by induction. So we have this property which is hereditary, and we have the fact that it holds for 0 for any animal. So therefore, all the descendants of any animal that you choose that lived 100 million years ago must be of the same species as that animal, because each one of them gives birth to an animal of the same species. Now, all humans that exist today are descended from animals that existed 100 million years ago. Okay, this is the evolutionary thesis, that we are descended from previous ancestors that existed in the past. So from that it follows by induction that all humans today are of a species that existed 100 million years ago, are of the same species of these animals X that gave birth to animals that gave birth to human beings. But that's impossible, because our species Homo sapiens did not exist 100 million years ago. so if Dawkins thesis were true, then we would have to reject premise 3, which is that all human beings that exist today are descended from animals that existed 100 million years ago, so therefore evolution would be false. And this would not apply just for human beings, but for any species, so therefore we would literally need to every single species that exists today and ever existed to have been miraculously created, or to emerge out of, it doesn't need to be miraculous, but it would have to emerge without having an ancestor. So you would have like whales forming in the ocean just from, random collections of random rearrangements of particles. So this is the first absurd thesis of Dawkins. Now the second one is very close to it. It says that there was no first human being. Listen.
Its parents. The process of evolution is so gradual that you can never say, aha, now suddenly we have the first human.
Okay. So this is also false, and it's basically false by the same reason, because the principle I'm going to use, which is the well-ordering principle, is basically equivalent to the induction principle. But basically it says that every subset of natural numbers has a minimal element. Maybe this one is more intuitively obvious for someone that doesn't do mathematics. So if you take a set of natural numbers like this one, of course there is a minimum number, and even if your set is infinite, there is a minimum number. And you can also do this always. So maybe there's no maximum, but a minimum is also there's always a minimum, a first element, if you will. So the appropriate set, now we are going to apply this to a particular set of natural numbers, and this is how we're going to do it. So okay, this may be seem a bit technical, but so we are going to organize some sort of referential system of time. So define the origin of time. I'm not saying that time started like 1 billion years ago. I'm saying just for this particular purpose, we're going to call the origin of our some sort of Cartesian system or timeline time 0. That's going to be 1 billion years ago, like long time ago. And time n be n seconds after that. So you start counting 1 billion years ago, then 1 second passes and you start counting 1, 2, 3, 4 until you get to the present day, because only a finite number of seconds passed between a billion years ago and now. Many seconds, but only a finite number. Then define a function m that assigns to each time t a number m of t, this means that the number m depends on t, which is the number of human beings that exist at time t. So what you do is you start 1 billion years ago, t equals 0, how many human beings there are? No human beings. So m of 0 is 0. Then 1 second after that, how many human beings there are? There are still 0. And you continue. And today, which is time something that I don't know, but just the number of seconds that passed during 1 billion years, you will say that there are, I don't know, but let's say 6 billion human beings. Of course, that's not the exact number, but there is a number. So then consider the set. Now, what does this mean? This is the set of times t such that the number of human beings is not 0. So if you have, so for example, the present day is in this set. Oh, there is a little thing here. Every subset of natural numbers that is not empty, obviously. So it should be written here, non-empty set of natural numbers. So if it's the empty set, obviously it doesn't have any minimal element because it doesn't have any elements. So this set here is a subset of natural numbers because all the times t are natural numbers, and it's not empty because the present second, or any second that you wish that as human beings, is there. So this proves that there was a first second of humanity, a first human, first time when there was a human. But you can say, okay, maybe two were born at the same time, but that's fine. Dawkins said that you could not say, now there's the first human being. Actually, you can. So there was the first second in which the human being existed. So from the previous discussion, by applying the principle of well ordering to this set S, there is a minimum element of the set S, and we call it P, just because I want to call it P. From this it follows that at P minus 1 seconds after time t equals 0, there were no human beings, but in the second after that, there were. So because, of course, my time t is the minimum time, such that there were no human beings. So yeah, sorry, my time p is the first time that there were human beings. So at time p minus 1, since it's strictly smaller than the minimum, there were no human beings. Otherwise, the p minus 1 would itself be the minimum. So from that it follows that at time p there were human beings, but at time p minus 1 there were no human beings. So you could literally stay there and say, now there are no human beings, and 1 second after that, now there are human beings. Because, and this follows just again from mathematical principles that are universally accepted and can be proved. I mean, there is no discussion on that. You just need to accept the only premise that I use are two scientifically tested premises. One of them is that billion years ago there were no human beings, and that now there are human beings. So if that's true, then there was a first human being. Okay. Now, of course, there is just one more thing I want to say. So basically, if Dawkins was right, then evolution would be false, because we would have to, at least for the first part, for his first claim. The second claim is just really false. There's no salvation. This one, but the first claim is obviously if the first claim is true, then that means that effectively all beings that exist were created without an ancestor. So that would be some sort of creationism. Although I'm not making this video to defend that view, I'm just pointing out that Dawkins is making here uh, false claims and saying that they were part of scientific discussions. Just about the definition of human being, you could say, okay, but we haven't defined human being very well. Yeah, but so you have two options. Either you say, there's no human being, the word human, the expression human being has no definition, and in that case, the statement that there are human beings today is meaningless. So I think that's not a viable option. And the other one, you can say, I mean, the definition is not very clear. Yeah, that's true, but my argument doesn't depend on what the definition of human being is. It just depends on the fact that there are human beings today, and there were no human beings a billion years ago. And if your definition of human beings is going to be a good definition, then it certainly must be true that there were no human beings a billion years ago and there are human beings today. So that's just, I wanted to share with you, just be cautious about Dawkins' statements, because sometimes he makes very false claims that are even mathematically possibly shown to be false.